Welcome to Johnno's Garage. This is part one of a story I actually wrote myself, a science fiction story called Coffee. Good food, you say, midshipman? I suppose it is at that. Our chef is fairly skilled. But I can remember, before you hatched, maybe a dozen or so Dara back, we used to have a better one. Back when I was a first lieutenant aboard the Ambassador Zenge. My word, but she was good. But you've never seen a chef like her. I don't suppose you ever will, really. Great pity at that. Her species was really well suited to cooking. But looking back, I guess it was just destiny, and nothing could really be done about it. Maybe I should just tell you about what happened to her and her species. Oh, what species? A little hard to describe them. They were a mid-sized life form with 4 limbs and a head, fairly Kront-like, really, if you ignore the lack of an exoskeleton. They came from an obscure world orbiting a star that's fairly close to the second arm. They called themselves humans. They were pretty average, I suppose, not unusually smart or stupid. They evolved from brachiating anemoids who later started walking bipedally. Below average astrogators, but they'd not long had access to the technology, so no surprise there, and above average soldiers. But for my story, you need to know 2 things. Firstly, they were really gregarious. There were several billion of them on their world. Yes, I know, that's a lot. And they tended to find it hard to be on their own. They generally made friends pretty quickly, and I don't mind telling you that within a duty cycle or 2, I called Sarah, that was her name, a friend. Secondly, though, they came from a world that was unusually rich in life, much of it of a really aggressive type. The biochemistry of their world had to be seen to be believed, living things everywhere, small and large, mobile and sessile, and since they evolved in that kind of an environment, life worked at a higher speed than it does on most planets. It really was eat or be eaten, and they ate maybe their own body weight every 15 Mikdara. So both their body and their society developed around eating, and they had the most amazing biodetectors. All sophonts find joy in flavours, of course, but these beings experience tastes like most sophonts experience colour. So when they made contact with the Coalition, they very quickly found that they had a gift for understanding flavours. I remember when Sarah first came aboard, she would spend some time watching what members of each species ate. There were maybe 3 or 4 species of sophont on this ship, not counting her, and taking a nibble here or there. Next thing you know, she had created this amazing banquet at which each crew member was given something that matched perfectly what flavours she'd deduced we liked. And she was right nearly 9 times out of 10. She never missed with me. Such food! She just understood flavours, and so she understood what we all liked. It seemed magical. Apparently on her world, almost any ceremony involved food and drink. Practically all philosophies and religions they had would practice ritual meals. The birth of a child, the death of a friend, commemorations, even simply acknowledging a person surviving a revolution of their planet around its primary. Sarah had a ceremony she practiced with friends simply when they had time to spend together, and it involved consuming a drink made by passing hot water through a powder made by grinding the seeds from a plant which grew on their planet. The stuff has a potent stimulant effect, and it also tastes pretty good if you make it correctly, which Sarah always did. She called the stuff coffee. I like consuming it when I can, but nowadays it's expensive. It's rarer than Tarfurp's nostrils. We got to know Sarah pretty well. She was with us for about a Dara, maybe 2, before we were given a mission to handle the diplomacy between the Coalition and the Dark Empire. I can see you've heard of the Dark Empire. Well, most of what you've been told is true. I won't speak of what the Trialians are like as people, of course. Presumably they're like everyone else, with good folks and bad folks mixed together. But the Empire itself was rotten to the core. The Emperor was just a figurehead. Really, it was the Chief Admiral of their military who actually held the power. They tended to need little excuse to go to war, and although the Coalition was strong enough to wear them down and eventually put them on the defensive, the skirmishes we fought with them were costly. But eventually we reached the point where the Empire couldn't fight anymore, and so they sued for peace. A message arrived by hyperwave saying the Dark Empire wished to end the war, and could a delegation be sent to their homeworld within a quarter rotation of their planet, whereupon negotiations would be conducted with all due formality and guaranteed by the laws of the Dark Empire. The problem was the Admiral. Now, he was a wily negotiator. If he couldn't get what he wanted by the application of military forces, he could often fool diplomats into accepting empty promises in return for major concessions. To avoid this problem, the captain of the Zenge was given full ambassadorial powers, along with a simple list of points which represented the best deal the coalition was prepared to offer the Empire. I later found out there were 3 main points. She had to insist that there could be no more than 10 battle stations in the expanse between our 2 polities, that no tronolic weapons could be mounted on their ships, and that they would be limited to a fleet of no more than 5 stellar masses. We were a little concerned about the mission. There was a lot of pressure on us, especially the captain, and we were all worried that we might screw it up. Thing is, though the Admiral had given us a pretty tight time frame, a quarter rotation worked out to less than a Dandara. If we didn't get our emissary to the Empire by his deadline, he stated that he'd assumed that we wanted to continue fighting. It was obvious that he couldn't keep up military effort, of course, but that wasn't the point. The point was that to all the minor powers in the region, we'd wind up looking like warmongers if we failed to send appropriate negotiators. It was pretty carefully calculated. He knew that we'd have only 1 or 2 ships in the area carrying people senior enough to negotiate a settlement, so our options were limited. There were better ambassadors than our captain, but at best they would be in Empire territory, Dandara's too late. The captain kept to herself for most of the journey. She was having her diplomatic advisors run as many simulations as possible so that she could imagine what the Admiral might say. But we all knew she was worried that she didn't have what it took to complete the negotiations favourably. I think the thing bothering her was that cunning statement, "by the laws of the Dark Empire." The Dark Empire conducted business in a vastly different way to any other species in the known galaxy. Unlike most polities, who created binding treaties by documenting them, the Dark Empire preferred verbal contracts. The exact words you said, and no less. And that meant that the slightest slip of the tongue or misunderstood word would lead to an unworkable treaty, handing the Empire a concession they hadn't earned or that we couldn't afford, or giving the Admiral an excuse to score more diplomatic points against us. We arrived in the Empire's territory in good time and were given a clear welcome in one of the Empire's largest and most well-appointed stations. The Admiral evidently wanting to at least present the appearance of willingness. This station had ostentatious defences mounted on it, operated, we'd heard, by nearly 100,000 Imperial security personnel, and had a civilian population of nearly 1 million. There was a solemn ceremony of welcome to which all officers of the Zenge were invited. In this context, invited really meant required, so Sarah and I were in our best-dressed uniforms, standing as stiffly as we could manage, as armed soldiers marched and carefully presented their arms. Each Empire officer then stood face-to-face with one of us. The number was carefully matched to ours, and rested their weapons on the floor at their sides. It was a clear signal that one didn't need to know Trialian body language to understand. This was a negotiated peace, not a surrender. They were not handing over their weapons, they were standing their forces down. As we had been instructed to do, each officer held up a manipulatory appendage and then sharply struck an appendage on their opposite number. Sarah found this amusing. When we were being briefed, she said something about their dignified greeting gesture being a high five, whatever that meant. The reception seemed to go on forever, but eventually we were dismissed, and the captain and the admiral retired for their negotiations. Each of us were free to enjoy the facilities of the station. Since this station was the trade capital of the region, there was lots to see, and an excellent marketplace. More importantly, like many marketplaces serving spaces, this one had a big selection of food items available. So it was no great surprise that Sarah quickly disappeared into the hurly-burly to see what she could find to improve the already ineffable quality of the Zenge's meals. We thought nothing of this. After all, it was what she did nearly every time the ship stopped somewhere that had market facilities. But fate was about to intervene.